Well, tēnā koutou. Welcome everybody to this kōrero on wāhine and leadership, brought to you by Dar Al Salam, or Te Wharerangi Mārie, House of Peace. So I'm really privileged and it's my great pleasure to introduce our panelists tonight. I'll do a quick introduction of our amazing panelists and then we'll jump into some questions about leadership. Before I do that, I'll introduce myself briefly. Tēnā koutou, he ru tēnei no maniapoto, no taranaki, no ngārua hine huki. My name's Arama and I'm a research fellow at the University of Waikato, where I work in our population studies department. And my research is largely around racism and Māori migrant relations. So I'll introduce the panelists in the order that they appear on my screen. First up on my screen, we have Golriz Ghahraman, MP, who is an Iranian-born New Zealand politician and Member of Parliament. The former United Nations lawyer was also a child asylum seeker and became the first refugee elected to New Zealand's Parliament. She also recently released her memoir, Know Your Place, which was published by HarperCollins in June of this year. Secondly, on my screen is Dr. Angela Lim, who is CEO and co-founder of Clearhead, which provides online mental health and wellbeing support directly to consumers for free. Angela is Malaysian Chinese and migrated to New Zealand when she was 15. She trained as a pediatric doctor and has been involved in multiple research projects and was a finalist in the 2017 Young New Zealander of the World, Young New Zealander of the Year Award. Sorry, kia ora, Angela.
Yeah, I'll take the Young New Zealander of the World though.
Young New Zealander of the World, yeah.
It's the same.
It's pretty much the same. And finally, last but not least, I'd like to introduce Superintendent Naila Hassan, who joined the police in 1988, was the first female police physical training instructor at the police college. She qualified as detective and worked in investigations, then as police prosecutor, and then district manager of prosecutions. She was promoted to inspector, then area commander for Waikato, and went on to become district commander for Waitemata. Kia ora, Naila.
Kia ora.
Since I'm speaking with you, I might start with you if you don't mind. So
Sure.
that was quite a very quick run through your career. And it seems that you were perhaps breaking a lot of ground, being the first woman to do lots of different roles. What was that experience like for you? Did you feel like there were glass ceilings? Did you feel you had to overcome anyone's perceptions of you to move through the ranks in the way that you did?
I think I spent a lot of years just hiding in the background. I think I had a desire definitely to do certain things in the New Zealand Police, but I never expected to be where I am today. And I think that's a consequence of just a bunch of hard work and commitment to the roles that I've been in. I had no expectation of what I wanted to achieve as a police officer. But certainly, I guess, because I've always been into sport, I've sort of had that quite competitive nature that I want to win. I want to get. I want to achieve the goals that I set, and I guess part of that has been, I decided I wanted to be a physical training instructor. I wanted to get a law degree, and so whatever I guess I've wanted to go out and do, I've just had a crack at it and put all into it. And really, from my perspective, I think it's been more effort and commitment than intelligence or anything else, to be honest. I've never felt like I've needed to prove things to others, but I've certainly felt internally like I'd like to do things for me and for my whānau. But a lot of that I spent most of my career probably hiding in many ways, just wanting to kind of keep to myself, I guess.
So it sounds as though you didn't begin with this idea of where you might end up at the end, but at each step along the way, it seems like you were very clear about what the next step was, the next place that you wanted to be from where you were. Did you have to, were the people around you that believed in you and saw that for you, or did you have to kind of create that path for yourself, or was it a mixture of both?
Yeah, I think it was a mixture of both. I think probably the first, until maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I didn't actually have any intent to stay in the police and have a career in the police. It was always just, let's have a crack at something and enjoy it. So for me, it was about being the best I could be in what I was doing and enjoy it. And I guess, in the last sort of 7 years, I've taken it a little more seriously. I did a course of study for about 10 years. I did a number of degrees, and I guess I sort of finished that and thought, well, what can I do next that's really going to make a difference for New Zealand and the people in New Zealand Police, and I guess that's why I decided to take promotion. I've also had a number of people sort of putting their hand on my back and pushing me forward and giving me that belief in myself that I think you don't, as women, we just don't tend to have for so long.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think like from what you've described, it sounds as though you're kind of shattering barriers that you didn't even really know were there until you'd broken them, and maybe we're told about that. And Golriz, that kind of reminds me of when you were told about becoming the first former refugee to be elected. Could you share that experience with us and what that might have taught you about what it means to be a leader?
Yeah, I really related to that. I think I never, nothing that I did was intentional in terms of breaking any ground or being particularly ambitious. It was always sort of, if anything, I think I always questioned myself. So I was always really interested in human rights. I was interested in politics, but I was all about, like, you've got to start at the bottom. You can't, it can't be me just now. And I just look at young people putting themselves forward, and I'm in total awe, because I would have never had that like self-belief or that kind of even just immediate ambition, so I went off and was a barrister, and I did that at that kind of bottom layer. And now I have people talking to me about like, oh, I want to be a UN lawyer, how do you do that? And they're at uni, and I think, oh my God, I would never have backed myself in that way. It's awesome. But yeah, someone else figured out that I would have been the first ever refugee MP once and I'd been in the Green Party a long time, so I'd been asked to run a couple of times and hadn't run for a couple of elections, and then I did, because I thought I'd paid my dues, it was all of that. Didn't think I would get in, and I got in. So actually the byline on my book, because it's Know Your Place, and there's like all sorts of meanings to that, obviously. There's a little bit subversive of something we get shouted at as refugee background people, especially in politics or leadership, or wherever we're visible. But in coming up with the byline, I've got, it's something like found her voice or whatever, and accidentally made history. And the publisher was really against that part of it, because they thought it was self-aggrandizing. And it was just so interesting to me, because for that community who never had representation, and I learned this after I was elected, because they told me, because people were in touch in droves about, what it meant to them, and I couldn't get my head around it, but there was this void of representation. And then there was someone with a little bit of that story, that face, whatever. So I wanted it noted, that when we have a first, that is making history. But it was accidental, and the fact that for them it was still like, oh my God, like, what? You can't just say that about yourself. Yeah, it was like, oh my God, I've come full circle. I'm actually fighting for this. Like, yes. Yeah. So that was a revelation to me, that I could actually fight for those words to be used in that way. So
yeah, I find that just really interesting, and it kind of just reminds me a little bit of my own kind of journey within academia, where you're culturally and because of your gender kind of conditioned to be humble, but you get to a particular point where you're like, no, this is actually important. It's important that when I stand up and other Māori people see me, that they know I've got a doctorate, like, even though—
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And you've got your doctorate on in the tag in the video, and it's so important.
I didn't even know that was there. That's quite embarrassing.
No, I've noticed it. My dad always corrects me when I talk about friends of mine who are doctors without saying doctor. She's a little
And Naila, I
feminist.
see the
Yeah.
eye in front of yours. Yeah. Angela, you should add doctor and Golriz. Where's the MP? Come on, represent.
It's pretty funny because there's actually a Facebook group of just like all the female doctors. And we talk about that it comes up quite a few times where when you look at media articles, if they talk about a male doctor in the piece, they'll put Dr. Smith, for example, Dr. John Smith. But if it's a female doctor in the same piece, it'll be like Dr. John Smith and, Angela Lim. Like, and they would leave out the doctor for the female, but put the doctor for the male. And it comes up quite a lot. It's pretty interesting.
That's absolutely not okay. But I'm just talking now, but this was kind of the basis of when I first realized I have an issue with anxiety. I realized it was always in retelling my qualifications. Like I'd gotten to a point where I was properly in the UN system. I was a UN prosecutor, and so people would ask me to do talks like this, just like to interns, to our people that I knew even, and I would get that shortness of breath when I would start to talk about what I'd done in the past and the jobs that I'd had, and it was in particular around having a master's from Oxford, and it still like sticks in my throat because it feels like we're not allowed to talk about our credentials. But I really
sounded like it stuck a little bit in your throat before you mentioned it again. So.
No, but seriously, it does. But as women, you exactly what you're saying in articles, they'll chop off your doctorate. When I appear in an article, if I share a position on behalf of the Green Party, which is just my job to do, people will come in and often it'll be, well, what gives you the right to talk about that? What qualification? You wouldn't know anything about that, and it'll be like justice or human. It'll be a refugee issue. And men don't ever get, their qualifications questioned in the same way in politics, because it's politics. You don't need qualifications, it turns out.
No, look at the crazy election we're having this time around. When we were talking about kind of breaking barriers and doing things and being the first to do things, it reminded me of a little bit of your journey, Dr. Lim, around, I'm just going to call you Dr. Lim now.
Please call me Angela. I'm really not that whole.
Dr. Angela.
But it did make me kind of think about your path, and I'm sure, like, training to be a doctor, that must have been a competitive process. You must have had to be quite focused and determined to get to that point. And what a leap of faith then to take time away from that and create your own business, your own passion. Could you tell us a little bit about that process, what that was like, taking that leap of faith, and what you hope to achieve through this business?
Yeah, when I applied for medical school, I think the acceptance rate was something about like 10% of those who apply would get in. And I think for me is just more around not being fixed around your journey, in the sense that if you don't, I think I definitely had a lot of people say that to me. It's like, oh, don't you think it's such a waste? You trained for that time, because I trained for 8 years at university. I trained clinically after university for another 3 years. And everyone's like, oh, don't you think it's such a waste to leave all of that? And I always said it's not a waste. All that experience I take with me into this new, this new path that I've taken. So I think that it's really easy sometimes to feel victimized, and I think that there's a lot of systemic issues that do need to be addressed. But at an individual level, how do you choose the narrative? Because you can't choose what happens to you, but you can definitely choose how you react to it and how you tell the story. And from my perspective, I think that the reason I decided to start Clearhead was the last 10 years sort of being involved in health IT through various governance roles. I felt like because of the risk adverseness that existed, a lot of the technology that was being proposed were just very incremental. It was never going to transform the outcomes that we want to see. It was just tinkering on the edge. And I think one of the things as women we need to come to terms with, and I think Naila, you briefly mentioned it, is like how, or even you too, Golriz, is like how do we actually become confident of what we stand for and what we bring to the table, and actually being able to say that if I don't do this, nobody else would. And I genuinely still believe that, even though the last 2 years running Clearhead was very difficult, and I would always say I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. I generally thought that if I give up, there were not very many people who will have the set of experience that I do and the team that I do to actually achieve what we had set out to achieve. So I think ultimately all of this, and I think all three of us on the panel, and probably also yourself, Arama, I think carry a weight of responsibility around what our role is in this community, and that it is not only a privilege to be in the positions that we are, but it's a responsibility to then, when we are in this position, to uphold it. So yeah, I've always just saw it as something as giving back. This was just the next iteration of my journey, and yeah, it was never a huge battle per se.
Oh, that's good to know. Quite often when we have these conversations about ethnic women in leadership, there is like a little bit of a, I guess, deficit focus. Like, what did you have to overcome to get where you got, to get where you have? And sometimes I guess that might leave out some of the wealth of knowledge, experience, wisdom, guidance that comes from being a member of the communities that we're from, or having experiences that we've had. But I might just do like a kind of quick round to you all, and maybe just ask you, like, what experiences from the communities that you represent, or knowledge or guidance or inspiration did you draw from being who you are and from the community that you're from, and how have you applied that to your leadership? Maybe I'd start with you, Dr. Lim, because we're talking to you.
Yeah, I think that, sorry, I got a bit distracted because I replied one of the attendees. Maybe.
Oh, right. Oh, sorry. Are you ready to go? Or maybe. Maybe I'll just like.
Yeah, I feel like I've talked too much.
Oh, Naila.
Oh, yes, because Naila, I've heard that when you spoke earlier, you talked a little bit about being in the background and hiding, and that it wasn't until later in your career that you started to be more open about your own faith. Could you share that, and how being open about that has changed things for you, and if it has helped you in the role that you do?
Yeah, I think if I just go back and talk a little bit about, there's a good reason, and I don't blame the New Zealand Police, I blame me, and it's about that self-belief and that confidence that actually the person you are at home is the person you can be in public, and be incredibly proud of that. And I think so often you think that your persona in public, and particularly wearing the uniform, is something different to what you are at home, that person. And I guess it was when I got promoted to inspector in 2012, I didn't want people to know. They wanted to celebrate the success, ethnic woman promoted first ever in the New Zealand Police to an inspector. And I really didn't want to be that person. Look at me. I wanted to be the person that quietly just carried on doing my own thing. But I think you get to a point in your career where you are a leader by default. It's not by rank, it's by what you do and what you stand for. And you're a leader by default, and it's your job now to open that door, and it's your job to lead the way for other women and other ethnic people, be that woman or not. Because of what you stand for. So I think by recognising that and knowing I've got something to add for the New Zealand Police in terms of the women that follow me, and the number of women that have reached out since I've done that have said, oh my gosh, that's just great that you've done it. Now I feel like I've got the mandate. I know one officer came to me soon after and said, look, I've married a Muslim man, and I converted to be a Muslim 5 years ago, but I can't tell anyone about it because I just don't want people to know. So I guess you give people the mandate through the role you have and the position, and you really know you've got to lead from the front, and you're going to make the difference for all the women and ethnic people that follow you.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being such a inspiration to all of those coming up the ranks behind you. Did others want to share at all about what it has meant to you and your leadership style, being from the community that you're from?
Yeah, that it's really interesting to me, just as a quick aside, because I often get presumed to be Muslim because of where I'm from, and it's never an answer to when it's brought up in abuse. You know, I would never say, oh, I'm not Muslim, because it's never, that's not the answer to that. But I do sometimes clarify it when I'm trying to point out that the Islamophobic stuff, when it does arise, is actually, much of it is racism. So it's not really, it's xenophobia, it's racism, it's, you know, it happens to be a religion of those people. So, you know, they make it about religion, but often it's something else. And in my case, it's about being a refugee from the Middle East. So I sometimes bring it up, but it's, I just can't even think how important it would be for people to see a Muslim woman in the police force, just given that they've found it so confronting to see me just, you know, wandering around, not even being overt, you know. Yeah, I think one of the things that this question brings up for me, which is really funny, not in a comforting way, is that when I first ran, and I'd go into spaces, you know, you go and do sort of Rotary and whatever else in spaces that aren't that well versed in sort of race politics or anything else, race issues, and they'd be really receptive to what I'd be talking about, but then they'd kind of say, oh, you know, how, inevitably there'd be one or two people who'd want to know how we can help other refugees from those places assimilate so well to Kiwi culture. And they would say that, you know, they would say things like that. And I'd go, you know, what do you mean? What makes you think I've assimilated so well? And it was always like about feminism, about being educated, about being confident, whatever it was. And it became really important to me to notice within myself, and also to make it known that I get most of those values and most of those characteristics from Iran, from my culture in the Middle East. You know, that there was those democracy movements in the Middle East, there was feminism in the Middle East, there's environmentalism, there's all of those cultures. You know, the million women who marched against the hijab being introduced in Iran were Muslim. You know, they weren't, I mean, some of them weren't, but they were predominantly Muslim women. They still had the political belief that the state can't impose religious stress, and they were strong enough to face tanks, you know, face torture for their feminism. It's important to me that that's what comes to mind when, and in politics things move really quickly. You're in a meeting with a minister and you're negotiating something, and if you don't speak up, you know, the decision gets made and things move along, and you either have to answer for it, or more often than not you don't have to answer for it because no one knows that even happened. And so it's kind of important to me to go, okay, well, I'm now in this space, and this is the history of what got me here. These are the people that didn't make it, and that it was that important to them that women are in leadership or that democracy exists. So I better be a problem maker and say something even when it's uncomfortable. So I think that's what I draw from in my work.
Yeah, when you were sharing about oh, sorry, Angela, were you going to say? Just when you were sharing about going to those Rotary clubs or wherever it might have been, and, you know, saying, oh, how do we, you know, encourage others to be like you? It just really reminded me of kind of the bind we find ourselves in often as Māori. Obviously, we have a long history of assimilation agendas against us. And what I've found in my own journey, and, you know, many Māori that I've spoken to have similar experiences where your your Māori culture is viewed as a deficit until you succeed, and then suddenly you're the poster child, and you know you're a good one, you're one of the good ones, or you're a good Māori, and then they celebrate your success, but only to a point. Then there is this brown ceiling, and no one actually wants to see. Everyone wants to see a Māori person achieve a little bit, so we can claim ignorance and innocence and that there's no racism here, but they're not comfortable having somebody in a position of power that is a brown woman. And I'm sure you would have faced that goal.
This is it. And it's actually really uncomfortable to list your credentials in that way. Not in the me feeling inadequate, getting shortness of breath way, but when you become that token and people want to list your successes in a certain way to kind of go, I mean, not overtly, but sometimes we get used as evidence that the system doesn't need to change, that women are liberated, that racism doesn't exist, that whatever, all that, you know, in my case, because it's the refugee stuff, and I was sometimes, you know, would be the little poster child in different ways when we were trying to increase the refugee quota. And eventually I kind of was like, okay, well, whatever way we can get it done, people are dying. But it was that idea of the good refugee. And often we are women. So, you know, brown women, Muslim women, refugee women often get, you know, with the examples of the liberated, you know, oh, look at her, she's strong. Oh, you know, well done. She's really taken advantage of the Western opportunities. And yeah, probably leave it there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's I totally agree with that. I think what women need to realise from this group of panellists we have here today is that I certainly believe it. I'm not extraordinary, and I think what people do is they put you up as being extraordinary. That's why you've succeeded, but actually, I'm not extraordinary. I'm an ordinary person, and so they celebrate you as being extraordinary. But as soon as you know, the more we need this to be the norm. We need it not to be extraordinary. You know, yes, we've achieved, but we've achieved. We're just as ordinary as the person beside us. But somehow someone's put up that poster girl and said, hey, you made it through the glass ceiling.
Yeah, and if we're extraordinary, it's because there's been barriers for other people, you know, for generations before. It's remove the barriers and we'll get up here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, I think that, like, I mean, there's so much to unpack with just like what's been said so far. I think one is sort of like the inherent hierarchy that comes from preserving the status quo by using model minorities as a way of oppressing others. You know, like, oh, if you are like Asian people, then you will, like, you know, you'll be very good at math and then you'll be successful, and using that as a way of actually unpacking everyone else's strengths. So I think that's a interesting one to chew on, and I'm not going to delve into it here. But I think the other thing to also note is that sometimes it's not just what's on the outside. It's not just my skin color. It's not just my ethnicity, my race, my gender. It's actually just even like how much of that cultural element that I bring do you accept? So one of the things that I actually have gotten in trouble a lot during my I guess my own career development was I was too outspoken for most people, especially as a woman. It's fine if a man did it, but not as a woman. And I think even now, even when I have achieved like what what Naila has said, you get to a certain point where you become a leader by default, and you have to speak up for the injustice that you saw. And one very recent example I can share is the Pacifica Festival. This was just, I think, a week before the lockdown was announced. And actually me and my co-founder were talking about this. We were worried about COVID already being in the community. We were at that time not testing for community transmission, and the impact of that if we did have COVID and we had I think it was something like a third of the participants for Pacifica was going to come from the Pacific Islands. There was going to be a huge number of people, something like 30,000 people that were going to attend, it just would become a logistical nightmare if we really did have community transmission. So I actually just wrote a piece on my social media saying, like, you know, I really hope that we reconsider allowing large-scale events like this to continue to occur. And I had actually a few people, actually even other doctors, male doctors actually, who kind of basically say, like, who are you to comment on this? And I kind of said, like, you know, this is the reasons why. But it sufficiently motivated other doctors that were concerned, including Pacific leaders. And what we ended up doing was we got 400 doctors to sign a petition that we sent to the Minister of Health at the time. And what ended up happening was the Auckland Council ended up cancelling that event, which I think triggered the other large-scale events like the March 15 to be cancelled, and then allowed, I guess, the sufficient public pressure for the government to feel comfortable to go into lockdown. But, you know, like that first day when I announced it, there was still moments where, like, who are you? You know, you're a female, like, who are you to speak up? And I think that's something to be conscious of, is that, like, you know, when we talk about celebrating diversity, it's also about celebrating diversity in the non-overt ways. It's the way we behave as leaders and being able to allow that to happen. Because I think I struggled a lot in my career, constantly being told to sit back down or, like, know your place, right? As your book says, Golriz. And it's, I guess, like my own sheer stubbornness that allowed me to not, you know, like, be shut down by others who tried to shut me down. But there would have been lots of women who would have been shut down. And how do we acknowledge that and allow that diversity to exist in our workplace, or just in general community?
Did you say?
That's such an important point. Sorry, it's I've thought a lot about over the past 3 years about the online abuse that I get, because people keep interviewing me about it and the way that it silences women of color in politics or in public life. And when it happens, and it's like, it is absolutely worse when I behave confidently, celebrate a win, or say something needs to be changed in, like, a confident, backing yourself. But what it is behaving like I deserve to be there in that position, because all the other MPs are behaving that way too. It's just that you get, you know, and just as you say, like, if you're a Pākehā man who had posted that as a doctor, it would just be like, oh yeah, this doctor is saying this thing, have you seen it? You know, it wouldn't have been, there'd be no, like, who are you to say that? So it's really jarring to the status quo when a marginalized community member who's in leadership actually behaves like they deserve to be in leadership. It's like that behavior, as you say, and it's not overt. It's not constantly talking about diversity or our race or gender. It's just that behavior. And I think quite often in my sector, at least in politics, what I notice is that marginalized background people, women and men, kind of blend into the really big parties and just only sort of turn up to do Diwali and the Lantern Festival or whatever else, like the cultural events. But then other than that, it's just this weird sort of, they're like the second tier. They do talk about cultural stuff, but it's kind of literally
often the background to the white person speaking.
Totally. And it's like, how do you start behaving differently? You know, like, turn up and talk to a portfolio, like demand a portfolio, but it must be so difficult. And it's a different, this isn't a political panel, but I do find it really different in the Green Party. So, and I think that's why I was there, is that, you know, those MPs always protested and they turned up to Middle Eastern protest stuff. And, you know, like, I just felt more at home. But it is that thing of like, oh, I have the justice portfolio, I can speak on justice issues.
And I think what often, yeah, absolutely, what often you see happen, and what a lot of people from many different communities, and it certainly happens within Māori communities as well, we often complain that the people who are there, who are supposed to be representing our interests to their party, are actually just turning up in the community representing the interests of the party to the community. So there's that real opposite there. So I guess there's a need to not let institutions, parties, organizations use you for your diversity that you bring, but but yeah, how do you work in a way that I guess has integrity, and it's not to say that it is our job to, you know, represent all the people from the community that we're from, but we shouldn't have to leave our culture at the door either.
No, but it's that two-tiered thing that Dr. Angela was just talking about, where it's like,
Please, just Angela.
no, you went and got that PhD. But you know, yeah, it's the you have to speak, well, you know, you have to actually bring the lived experiences that you have as that community member to your work and make space for them. And you're not going to be representing everyone in that community, absolutely not. But where it does arise, it is really hard to kind of interrupt the status quo institution and bring your lived experience and put it in there. But then the other level is just you're just operating as a doctor or a police prosecutor or whatever else, and it's being confident, being, you know, behaving like it, or just interrupting a man at a meeting. They certainly do it to us.
That's you raised some really good points. I guess I'd take that a little bit further in terms of terminology and say that's the difference between diversity and inclusion. So diversity is getting those diverse people, different ethnic backgrounds, ages, gender, whatever it might be, to the table. And with us, we bring a background and a context that other people aren't possibly used to. But diversity is bringing us there and sitting us at the table. Inclusion is actually hearing our story, making us feel like we are parts of that team, and actually what we have to say is really important. And a lot of what we say is from our lived experience. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's one, you know, it's a step further. And I think New Zealand, certainly in the New Zealand Police, I feel like we're doing really well with diversity. We've got a value, and that's one of our values, 6 values, is valuing diversity. And I think we're starting to do that really well in terms of recruitment. And now as an organisation, under our new commissioner, he's really strong on, so how do we take that step forward to actually inclusiveness, not just diversity?
And I actually had someone say this around what the difference between diversity and inclusion is, and I loved it. So diversity is being invited to the event. Inclusion is being asked to dance. So like, you know, it's like that next step, you know, like
I'll do the asking, thank you.
You've been invited. Yeah. Actually, I want you to dance with me and be a part of the thing. So that's something that has stuck with me. Yeah.
I think that's also us feeling like we belong. So inclusion is not just being there and being present, but actually feeling like you belong there. And that's by being able to say the things you want to say, or say them in a manner in which you want to say without feeling like you're being judged.
And I think that's just the work that all of you are doing is just so important in that respect. Just seeing others that you can relate to in a space makes you feel that you belong. So I just think it's just amazing, all the work that you're doing. I do want to just pick up on a question that has come through on the chat here, because it relates directly to what we're speaking about. We will have more time for questions later, but so people watching at home or wherever you might be, please keep the questions firing in and we'll address some more of them later. But one of them here, they're really sweet messages, by the way. Lots of fans talking about the influence that you've had in their lives. But we've got one here. How do you overcome, from Shard, I believe. How do you overcome the burden of representation, like being there to represent your whole ethnic group or religion in your everyday work or your volunteer work? And I think this is probably an issue that many of us have come across. Like you might be there to represent a community, but you might just be there to do your job, and all of a sudden you're being asked to you know, be the voice of your people. What's the Muslim position on this, or what's the Māori view of that? And like, I don't speak for my entire people. So I was just wondering if you've had any experiences with that, or how you get around that burden, or if it is a burden or a privilege.
I think in politics it's there. Yeah, go. No, I want to hear about New Zealand Police.
I'm miles away, it's okay. Go for it.
No, it's more simple, I think, in my field, because you're literally a representative. So you're meant to be representing big groups of people, whether it's your voters or whatever sector. You know, I've got disabilities, I've got immigration as portfolios as well, and you know, so that's a weird thing to get your head around in any case. But at least it's built into the job. But that kind of being the first refugee MP piece was a really, I won't say tough, because it's certainly an honour, but it was something that I took seriously in terms of making sure that it wasn't going to be pitched in that way where I'm just talking for the refugee community, because that is a diverse community internally, and part of the reason that some of the causes of our displacement happens is that we're seen as these vast, faceless masses that you can bomb, or you know, you can take the oil riches off of, or whatever you're doing. So you know, to be individualized is a really, really important thing to our community, and we've seen that for the, you know, with the Muslim community since March 15th. You know, that all of the international events that happen, and the way that we're villainized and seen as faceless, sort of oppressive, fundamentalist, terrorist masses, and the way that Muslim women are seen as being, you know, liberated from our culture when we succeed, or really, really oppressed when we happen to walk down the street wearing a hijab. All of these things are connected. So I just really didn't want to be a part of that as the first refugee MP, so to speak. So it is something that's difficult and always a piece of work, but I think it becomes about amplifying the voices within those diverse communities. If you have the job of representation, if you've taken that job on, then it becomes about making sure that you're kind of talking back to the community, and then providing those platforms for people, for other people, because yeah, we don't want to be extraordinary forever. It kind of sucks. Making safe spaces is kind of the way I get around it for others.
Naila, were you going to still say something?
Yeah, I think, you know, since 15th of March, prior to then, probably a lot of the Muslim population wouldn't have known who I was. Most of, you know, a lot of our Muslims in New Zealand may not have known who I was. And I think since then, it really has opened the door for, you know, some of it was the event and some of it was just the position I hold in New Zealand Police, has kind of opened the door, I think, between a community and New Zealand Police, the event as well as me. But I think you've also got to really balance that. You don't represent that whole community. You are one member of that community that happens to be in an organisation and influential in an organisation. But I think more than anything, I haven't found it difficult. I haven't found it hard. I think particularly the first year after 15 March, there was a lot of demand on me from that community, and I willingly took that on. I probably took on a bit too much, but that's what we do. But certainly, yeah, it's been a good experience, and I think it's been really good for opening a door where, so what happens is I've found, and in fact it was before 15 March when I was working in South Auckland, I sort of engaged with the Muslim community there and the mosques and the committees, and I went in as Naila Hassan, the Muslim that wore the blue uniform, and they trusted the person. I think over time our role is for them, my role was for them to trust the organisation. So don't trust Naila Hassan, the police officer, trust maybe more of our ethnic officers, and then slowly we broadened that out to bringing in our European officers into those mosques, and actually now no longer trust the individual that is a part of your community, trust the blue uniform that she wears. So I think that's probably been the proudest thing in terms of me representing that community for the benefit of New Zealand Police and that community.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add to that is actually just having the humility to say that, I am not representing, all of Asia, and just actually my role often has been, have you considered this? Have you considered that? Here's where you go and find more information here and more information there. And so I've often just take most people, unless they prove me wrong by good intentions, and just say, you're here because I'm here because you want to know more and you don't know what you don't know. And all I can do is broaden your thinking, give you some leads on where to start looking. But, it's not my responsibility for you to just be able to talk to me and then tick that box and then your job is done. Yeah.
Well, thanks for the round of answering that question. One thing I did want to touch on, because when I was first invited to facilitate this discussion, it is when I first started thinking about leadership and what that meant, and who I thought of as a leader, and being somebody who came through, I did a Bachelor of Science first when I was going through university, and we did this exercise, my fellow Māori students and I, where we would say, what do you think of when you think of a scientist, and you think usually of the white coat, the white man, all of these things. Well, I think sometimes if you think of a business person, you might have a particular image in mind. If you think of a leader, you might have a particular image in mind. If you go into institutions of power, like I remember, going into Parliament, I'm sure there's pictures of old white men on all the walls and things. So yeah, I guess some people might think that being a leader means something very specific, and often people, I think, also think being a leader is a particular personality, like you have to be loud, or you have to be aggressive, or you have to be bossy to be a leader. So I wanted to maybe see if you all had ideas that might challenge those ideas about what it means to be a leader, because I think that might be a first step that we need to kind of unpack a little bit before many of us are able to imagine ourselves as leaders. So I was wondering if you could share what you think a leader is. If anyone has any ideas about that, and maybe even something about your own leadership style, what your leadership style might be.
I could probably start with that, Arama. I think some of the best traits of being a leader that as a woman you never want to show in your early days in your career is vulnerability. So you really don't want to show that you're not as strong as others, that you might shed a tear when something hurts you. And for me, being a sports, a high performing athlete, the things that made me really good as an athlete, being a perfectionist, being competitive, having that poker face and showing no vulnerability, those things are incredibly inhibiting to people that work for you, because they feel like that sort of extraordinaire, she's up there and I can never be like her, I'll never be as good as her, I'll never be able to be, nothing I do will be as good enough for her. So I think when you become a leader, one of the biggest things I've learned over the last probably 6 or 7 years is don't be afraid to show vulnerability. And I think that makes you strong, because people see you as being a real person then. They don't see you as this machine that's so untouchable. So that's been a biggie, and really leadership is about loving our people. Every person you work with, every person you connect with, every conversation you have needs to be focused on the person you're speaking with, and it needs to be it needs to be purposeful, and probably the last thing I'd leave you with is reflection, self-awareness and reflection. So you've got that self-awareness of what your blind spots are, what you're possibly not good at and you need to work on, and reflection. As a leader, every day I reflect on what I've done during my day, and it's not celebrating so much, it's not always looking at the things I've not done well, and it's not only celebrating the successes, it's a bit of both. Celebrate the things that you've done particularly well, and I always focus on the people stuff. then, you know, and so what didn't I do? You know, what was a conversation? What was that I had with someone that I could have actually had that was a little bit better and leave a better impression on every person you communicate with? I don't always, I'm saying that's how it looks, you know, that's the perfect. I can't say I've got it nailed, there's no way.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm like furiously taking notes here in my mind. That was brilliant. Thank you for sharing that with us.
I'm happy to share as well. I think the last 2 years for me has really opened my eyes around the importance of courage. That really is what separates most leaders from everyone else. Is like when it gets hard, when it's the unpopular opinion, when you're challenging the status quo, do you have the courage to do what is the right thing to do? And I think, you know, on the outside, people think that all those that are working in the mental health space are there for because they care about the cause. One of the things that made me really sad to learn in the last 2 years is how much of that space is profit driven, and that the establishment is very motivated to make sure that they stay in the establishment as, you know, as leader, the market leader in that space, so they will continue to have the funding come to them. And I think that what is really important is what I've seen is that, like, it's ultimately, it comes down to, like, be the change you want to see in the world. You know, like, I have so many people who complain about things, but then they will not do anything about it. And I think people think that leadership just, you have to have a specific role, and I can say absolutely not. It's like, it's where there, it's like what you do that defines whether you're going to be a leader or not. And a lot of that will ask of you courage to be unpopular until you're proven right. The other thing that I think has defined my leadership journey is the ability to stay authentic. I think that's what resonates with people, is that if you watch a video of something that I talked about 2 years ago, I will still be saying the same thing. I'm not changing based on what's popular at the moment. I genuinely just say what I believe in and authentically believe that. And I think people find it really refreshing. And so the ability to be yourself and not just sway with the wind gives you credibility to continue to be in the space that you're in. So I think, to summarize, I think what makes good leaders are people who have courage in fighting for what they believe in, doing the hard things, and then staying authentic throughout the whole thing. And not just sacrifice your ideals for it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think what I think of when I think about a leader kind of really comes from that start in life back in Iran, and part of it was that my parents were against the establishment and against the regime, which was horrifically, oppressive. But a big part of that was, nepotism was in the system and propaganda existed and all of these things. So I really learnt at quite a young age not to necessarily look up to someone because of their status or position, And so I think when I came into the courts, I was much more felt much more responsible to the judgment of either the people that I was representing or juries or just sort of other people around the court, probably police prosecutors as well, rather than the judge. Because I kind of felt like they were the only people who weren't at the front line. They weren't in it, and they were often, they were King's boys, they were old, they were white, and so I was kind of like, I don't know if I wasn't totally sure that person was the one who kind of really climbed the highest because they deserved it, or everybody else who was actually doing that hard work and kind of facing the gritty truth about life. But I think of a leader as, and I guess as a result of that again, as well, I guess all of the things that you guys have said, being able to show vulnerability, having the courage of your convictions, all of those things, but having vision, sort of being able to imagine what is possible. And that always, for me, has to fall on the side of changing the world to be more equal and more just. And so it's about imagining a better world for those who are systemically marginalized and vulnerable under this system, imagining a different system, a different way of life. And you have to look at what's wrong, and who you need to raise to do that. So I think it's about having that vision and kind of fighting for what is better, and kind of changing the real root causes, and that takes courage, but it takes vision as well.
Well, thank you all for sharing those awesome tips. We're nearing the end of our time together, but I did want to address some of the really great questions that have come through. And what I might do is direct the questions at one of you each, and then have you respond as briefly as possible to the question. So I might start with you, Angela, and the question is, do you have to make a lot of sacrifices to your social life or some of your values to reach your goal? How do you kind of achieve balance in your life when you're out there being a boss?
I love that. Like, I was looking through the questions and I was like, that one resonated with me, and you picked the right one. So that's great. No is the answer. So like, I have always pride having a balance in my life. Even with all the craziness that I do, I at least spend 2 to 3 times a week just hanging out with friends or family, just, you know, taking that time out. So I think it's really important that part of that self-awareness and that reflection is knowing like how much of it you will need to fill your cup. And also not being afraid to say no, you know, like you might get a lot of social engagement. So if you know you only need, you know, like twice a week and you had like 4 invites, being unafraid to say like, no, I can't say yes to all of them. So yeah, so my friends notoriously know that like they need to give me 3 weeks advance notice to book the time in my calendar. But you know, I will make the time. It's just when is it? So that's one. The other thing, absolutely around the values thing, never. I have never sacrificed my values. And that is what makes me who I am in terms of the authenticity piece. And I think that even if it's hard, it's really important to stick to it, because that is what will, I guess, like separate you from everyone else. And do we get a final piece after this, or do we finish after each question?
We can come back for a final word.
Okay. I think there's a few things I wanted to say I haven't had a chance to say.
Okay, we'll come back to you.
To the final word.
So there's 2 more questions I want to ask, and one of them I want to direct towards Superintendent Naila Hassan, because you've had a long career and you have a large workforce. Golriz, you may also, but I don't know about that. So what your workforce might be like. But the question is here: what ways do you make space for other ethnic women in your organisation? How do you remove obstacles so other ethnic women can succeed?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do. So I lead our ethnic team for Tamaki Makaurau, so that puts me in a really good position to be able to do that. You know, we celebrate successes as a group. I sort of have a direct line with all of those staff, but we also set up support groups. So we have support groups for, whether that be Māori, Pacific or ethnic staff, where they can go, whether they're studying for exams or, you know, whether they just want some general questions answered, mentoring. We do a bit of ethnic mentoring. So they're the sorts of things that we've got in place at the moment, but by no means have we nailed it, that's for sure.
Thank you for that. And the last question I wanted to put out, I'll direct towards you, Golriz. And the question is around, and I think I might just frame it in a bit more of a broad way. It's around what to do when some of the barriers you face or some of the criticism you receive comes from your own community. Those that, you know, should be kind of propping you up, but instead, and it, you know, it may be out of reasons of fear or concern or whatever it might be. But what do you do when some of that is coming from your own community?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to differentiate between substantive criticisms that anyone is entitled, you know, that you can receive, and, you know, you can change and do better. And if it's about policy, or if it's about something, some part of my actual work, I totally, you know, I think we all kind of can take those on board, and no matter who they're coming from. But I think some of the criticisms that I get that come more broadly from sometimes like the Iranian diaspora communities around the world or whatever, is that I don't speak enough about Iranian issues, that I'm not Iranian enough, you know. And it's that kind of stuff where, well, you know, that's not my job. And, you know, I work for New Zealand's parliament, and we've got this election going on, and, you know, and you do try, and I certainly do try and kind of support some of their campaigns or whatever else. But often I find myself sort of relating more to the identity of being a refugee or a migrant woman of colour in the West than I do that kind of real sort of deeper Iranian issues stuff, politics stuff that I get sometimes criticised for. But it comes up at different times, and it's surprising sometimes when it does come up. But it's generally the root of it is you're not Iranian enough. And then, of course, the criticism and the abuse that I get from sort of Kiwis or Australians. There's quite a big Australian contingent as well online, just waiting to shoot down women of colour that are from refugee backgrounds. But that criticism is always like, you're not Kiwi enough to do this job. So it's these two opposing things where we sit in the middle, and you just have to hold on, I think, to your identity in the middle of that, and it's difficult. I think it feels like a loss.
I'm glad that we've got the Superintendent Hassan on the call here as well, taking notes of all of this abuse that's been coming through.
The police were wonderful to work with. I've got so many questions about how you feed into their like review of the hate speech and hate crimes reporting stuff, but we'll talk about that later. But they've been amazing when we've got them involved.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. Okay, thanks for that. I know, you know, being Māori, some of the criticism that we deal with is that kind of lateral violence that you might get like within your own community. But often, if you kind of unpick that a little bit, sometimes you see what's happening is that you've been put in competition with other Māori in your organisation, you know, or yeah, you've kind of been set up and only one of you is allowed to succeed or something in the eyes of the institution. So that's quite interesting sometimes, a dynamic that occurs. So if you're in an organisation and you're an ethnic woman, sometimes you're kind of pitted against other ethnic women, and sometimes that's where that competition and lateral violence can stem from. So I think, yeah, those broader issues, if we look at those, sometimes that helps to diffuse some of that lateral violence.
Yeah, and I think I would say, actually, because it's directly related to that question of how do you cope with it, I actually find a lot of that life affirming support comes from my networks of friends and colleagues who are women of colour, or doing panels like this or whatever. It's like therapy where you know, you're having it, not right now, but, you know, when you go and get a glass of wine with your women from those backgrounds, and we kind of dispel the mass gaslighting that we get, you know, where other women can go, oh yeah, I know exactly what that's like, and that's definitely happening, and that's bad, and that's wrong, and he's right, you know. And it's just that safe space to go, it is happening, it's not cool, you're allowed to be upset, or you're allowed to just forget about it now and have, you know, but it's just that space of, being believed and validated.
Absolutely. Right, we're kind of over time just a little bit, so I did want to just do a quick round, if anyone has any final thoughts or any tips they would give to young ethnic women, old ethnic women who want to become leaders. I know you've given so many tips already, but if you have any final words you'd like to share, please do so.
I will. I really just want to be able, like, you know, as we close this off, it's sometimes hard to believe that we're just as normal as everyone else, in terms of like when you start off these panels with the list of achievements rattled off. I almost always, when I do presentations, start off with how I was a B student across medical school. I was like, didn't know what I wanted to do until I was like maybe in my early 20s. So I guess my point I'm wanting to make is that what you see today in terms of my achievement, it was 10 years of hard work and figuring it out and making mistakes. And so basically, I was not born into this. I did not have, sort of like leadership pegged to me right from the beginning. It was just a journey of finding myself, and through that finding my purpose and doing this. It's never too late to start. I didn't really start till I was like I think 21. Sometimes you hear people who like start when they're 13 in high school or something. Like it's never too late to start. It's a process, and you don't have to be born into it. So I just want to give those who are listening faith that you can be who you want to be, and just don't let people say no to you. Just push ahead anyway. And the final thing is, like, I'm often representing, I guess, Clearhead, but Clearhead is a team. We are actually a very high performing team, but we're a team. And I cannot achieve even a fraction of that alone. It is only possible because of my team. And so I think Golriz briefly brought this up, but it's so important for you to find your tribe. You will feel lost until you do. And so, yeah, try and find your tribe, keep networking until you do. And that tribe can be either support people to kind of help you vent when things don't go well, or to help you achieve your goals. But it's often a team effort. Anyway, that's my preach. Is like, basically, I'm not superhuman. Don't believe that. And yeah.
Thank you. Any other final?
To call on us, you have to like go this person.
All right then, Golriz.
I don't know. I want to acknowledge that it's hard for women of colour, and especially for queer women of colour, and especially for disabled women of colour. So it's prejudice in the systems does exist. We can push through. Totally, but it doesn't mean that that it's not harder for us, and it doesn't befall on us as individuals to break that glass ceiling, because I don't feel like I've broken it, like it's on my face and it's bleeding, and it's hard, it's not, so I guess what I would say to others is, we see you and we're here for you, and we can't wait for you to be up here with us or wherever you want to be, and we're trying to make it easier. So thank you for inspiring us.
Naila?
Righto. Me next?
Yes.
Okey-doke. So I've got a few things here, and I think of the first thing is, be proud of who you are. Don't hide like I did for 2 decades. Be incredibly proud of who you are and what you stand for and what your culture and what your beliefs are. Don't trade your values for anything. They are non-negotiable. Take opportunities when they arise. Things will be presented to you along your journey, and just grab the opportunities. Don't think ever that you're not good enough to take them, because that's how we all got ahead. There was an opportunity. I think you would have heard from a few of us today saying you don't necessarily plan your future. Again, I left high school. I didn't get into university. I left high school, and went in the police, and it's only been, in the latter part of my career that I've gone and done 3 degrees, including a master's and a law degree. So, you can do these things even if your start is not perfect. And I think I just want to thank the New Zealand Police for letting me be who I am. They've created a really safe environment for me to show who I am, and that's why I'm here in front of you here today, and I feel incredibly proud of it. I'm not extraordinary. You are our future, and the 3 of us here as panellists are here for you to help you step up. The door is open.
Oh, beautiful. What a great way to finish. I'd really like to thank you, all 3 of you, not just for the contribution that you've made tonight, the inspiration that you've shared with all of our viewers, but also for the work that you're doing day in and day out. you know, you really just provide such an amazing set of role models when it comes to being able to see ourselves succeed, being able to see other people who look like us, so that we feel that we belong. And just there are so many great messages. I could never summarize the amazing kōrero that we've had tonight, so I won't even try. But thank you so much for all that you've shared and all the love that I've felt from your kōrero as well. We've had lots of comments come through as well, thanking you. So lots of people are really appreciating what you've shared tonight. I'd also like to thank Shay and the team at Dar Al Salam, House of Peace, for putting this awesome event together. Yeah, thanks to all of our viewers who have watched this. So I wish you all good evening, and party vote green.
Thank you.
I love
I'm on the brink, so thank you. Yeah.
Buy Golriz's book. Be nice to your local law enforcement, and go Google Clearheads as well, if you want some help with well-being and mental health.
Nice. And I think I'd love to say on behalf of the panelists, thank you for being such an awesome facilitator.
Yeah, thank you.
Arama Rata.
Guys.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you. Kia ora.